Hi guys, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Great, thank you. Sorry. Good morning, and sorry, my computer has chosen now to start acting up, so it's taking me a little while to bring up all my functions. But good morning, and thank you very much for your very warm welcome. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Peter for bringing me on board for this session. And as David mentioned earlier on, I am with Kingston Creative, and I certainly look forward to welcoming those of you who will be coming to Jamaica in February next year. Viv, it's nice to meet you virtually. I know that we have been talking via email about your visit, and we definitely look forward to hosting you and the group and to making all the others jealous who don't get to come with you. So today I will be talking about connecting across borders. But Peter has asked me to talk just a little bit about Kingston Creative, since some of you will be visiting, and so I'll start my presentation with that. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm assuming that I have the authority to share, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, sorry guys, my computer is really doing strange things, so just bear with me.
Did we lose her?
I
I
think we
think
did.
we may have.
Ooh,
I
okay.
think
She'll
she
come
shut
back.
her computer.
Arlene Russell, WhatsApp audio.
And you should be seeing my screen.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we
Okay,
are.
great. All right, great. So here we go. Okay, so as I said, today we're going to be looking a little bit at cross-cultural communication and awareness, and how we can connect across borders. But just before I start, I'll get into that. I'll just tell you a little bit about Kingston Creative, as promised. And Kingston Creative is a not-for-profit organization. We were founded in 2017 by a group of visionaries who really wanted to see the transformation of downtown Kingston through culture and the arts. And their goal really was and continues to be to significantly invest in Caribbean creatives, Jamaican creatives, but by extension, Caribbean creatives, in such a way that they can increase their opportunities to earn revenue, to be more visible, to gain global access to global markets, and in so doing, have an impact on their local communities. And that's a way of transforming the space that they are in. And if you know, I know there are some Jamaicans on the call, so I know that you know a bit about downtown Kingston, and downtown Kingston, really, for those who aren't very familiar with it, is a hub and a center for Jamaican culture. And so by feeding into the creatives who are there, we help to transform the area bit by bit. It has gone through its own a measure of turmoil over decades and has had a stigma attached to it, which Kingston Creative, along with other organizations, is seeking to remove through the work that we do. So the work we do is therefore centered around people and place. And this picture is just to show you where downtown Kingston is. It's on the it's flanked by the harbor, which I should boast, is the 7th largest natural harbor in the world. And I put this there just to make Peter and my other fellow Jamaicans a little bit nostalgic. But of course, all of downtown Kingston, yes, I see you, Joan, laughing. All of downtown Kingston doesn't look like this. And this is why the work that we do is so important, because there are areas that are depressed, that have been abandoned, that have been neglected. But as I said earlier, what remains the same is the rich history, culture, and heritage that resides there, and many of the creatives who never left downtown Kingston. So we work in a relatively small area, the area that you see delineated in red, which is probably about 2 miles going in each direction, and working in about 20 different communities, investing in the creatives and doing some amount of placemaking. So when I talk about the placemaking is via the form of murals and public art. And this slide just gives you a sort of picture of what things looked like before and what they look like now with the transformation. We have, over the past 6 years, created over 100 murals in Water Lane, which is the longest lane in downtown Kingston. And we have actually created the murals along an 8-block stretch, which strategically connects the Institute of Jamaica, which houses many of our Jamaican artifacts, with the National Gallery of Jamaica, which is Jamaica's pride and joy in terms of showcasing some of Jamaica's greatest painters, sculptors, etc. So that's been very strategic. And that has allowed us, of course, to develop these tourism products, which some of you will enjoy in February of next year, and to bring more people into the space. And it's very important that we bring people into the space, because when you bring people into the space, they start to patronize the restaurants, the bars, the cafes, etc., and they're spending money in the space. The more money they spend, the greater the transformation of the area. And I just wanted to share this with you. I'm sure that image looks somewhat familiar, or the wording. And so what you just saw there was the mural that was created by several Rotary clubs in Kingston, I think spearheaded by Kingston and East Kingston and Port Royal, but joined by several other clubs. And so we had the pleasure of partnering with them earlier this year to create this mural. And they were able to unveil the mural, I think, around about September, with great joy. So for those of you who come next year, you will have an opportunity to see that mural. And it's a very great addition to our strip. So with that said, and I'm happy to answer questions about Kingston Creative, should you have any afterwards. But with that said, I will just jump in to the main meat of our discussion today. And that, as I said, is about cross-cultural communication and awareness, and how that helps to connect, helps us to connect bridges. So we'll look today briefly at what is culture. We'll talk a little bit about the iceberg, and you'll see what that is when we get there. We look at cross-cultural awareness, some definitions, and key cultural dimensions. We'll talk about how we can build our own cultural intelligence. And finally, I'll offer some practical tools and key takeaways that you can chew on. So let's start with this quotation by Gert Hofstede. And Gert is a social psychologist, a Dutch social psychologist who spent a lot of time doing research on cross-cultural communication. He's almost considered the father of cross-cultural dimensions. And he says, if the mind is the hardware, culture is the software. Now, what does that mean? I mean, if you think it through, really and truly, culture is what we are programmed to do. It's something that's innate in us that we don't even think about, but it's always silently running there in the background as we go about our daily lives with the hardware. Culture is what is normal to a group of people. So we really don't think about it. As I said, we get up and we kind of do it on autopilot because it's what we have learned. And here's a quote again from Hofstede or Hofstede, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a collective programming of the mind which distinguishes one group of people from another. But here's my favorite definition from John Moll, also an author and a writer on cross-cultural business. It's how we do things around here. I like that definition because it's just really so simple. It just speaks to culture, as I said, being something that's so automatic, but it really describes a group of people, how they operate, how they think, what their values are. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the cultural iceberg. And I want you to think about when you hear the word iceberg, what is it? What's the first thing that you think about, or what is it that you know about icebergs? You can just open your mics and anybody can shoot some answers at me.
What you see at the top of the surface, that's just the small, minute, the underlying part that you're going to have to go deeper in is at the bottom. And if you think of a ship, how it's been anchored on the ocean, so those are some things you could look at.
Okay. One. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Wonderful, Joan. Thanks so much for that. So we often hear that it's the part at the top. Captains see the part at the top and they think, okay, I've seen the iceberg or I've seen the ice. All I have to do is navigate around it, not realizing that there's a huge mass below the surface, which if they can't see it, then they can't navigate their way around it. They're likely to collide into it. And then there's all types of chaos resulting.
I think
So, yes, go ahead. Was someone going to add something to Joan's intervention?
I'm sorry. I think they're beautiful, but they also are dangerous because there's so much that we don't see and don't recognize that are very important things.
Exactly, Suzanne. Very beautiful to look at. But what lies beneath the surface can also be quite fatal. No, why would we talk about a cultural iceberg? Okay, let's try to do the translation. If you think about a culture, when you arrive in a new culture, think about whenever you've traveled to anywhere, what aspects of a culture are above the surface, are at the tip? What do you see or experience immediately?
A few things come to mind, but a bit more things like what you hear, the language, the music, what the senses can pick up, I guess I would say. Like this food, the types of food, how it smells, how it looks. That would be the first images that I would have of the culture and the
Spot
people, of
on.
course. Yeah.
Right, spot on, Howard. All right, very visible things that you pick up right away. Even if it's your own language, it might be spoken with a different accent from the way you speak it. It might be the way people dress and so on, the food, as you rightly said. So those are the things that people often tend to focus on when they say, oh, I'm going into a new culture. But is there more to culture than those obvious things?
I think those are public things, or at least accessibly publicly. The family and the customs in the family, I think, are really critical.
Mhm.
Great idea. Anybody else agrees with that?
I also sometimes when you meet going to a different culture, could be work anywhere, there's bad language and there's some nonverbal communication taking place sometimes that you're not paying attuned to. And sometimes that's some of the unsubtle things when a couple of days after you start learn these norms, the norms that you should and shouldn't do. And it can be like, eye opener.
Right. Great. You guys have done your homework. Yes.
I think that one of the issues is that we're led to make assumptions based on what we don't see, and that those assumptions can lead us astray in communicating or interacting with people.
Excellent, Claire. Thank you for that. And so, as I said earlier on, the captain sees the ice above the surface, and he makes the assumption based on what he can't see. And then he gets himself into all kinds of trouble navigating some of the things that the other two speakers, that the other two persons just mentioned, the nonverbal communication, the subtleties, the customs, the family customs and values. So let's have a look at this slide.
Oof.
And yes, right. Oof. And you begin to get an idea of how many things there are. And this list, of course, is not exhaustive. I'm sure if we thought about it, we brainstormed it, we could come up with a whole lot of other things. But you as you skim through, you can just pick out a few of them, preference for competition. Some societies are very competitive, others are not. Tolerance of physical pain. Some cultures, it's okay to express pain. Other cultures, it's frowned upon. Problem solving. How do you treat with age, sex, class, occupation, kinship, tempo of work? And I'm just picking out random ones here. And I'm sure as you're looking through, there are probably things that are jumping to the forefront of your mind in terms of your own anecdotes of things that you may have run into. As Joan said, it's after you've been there a few days, then you start to see these things coming to the surface, and then you realize, oh, so that's why I was getting the funny look from somebody, or that's why this happened, or that's why I couldn't understand things. And I can think of, in my own experience, I'm looking at line 3, where you talk about touching and eye contact. I spent a couple of years in Japan as a teacher of English. And for the Jamaicans, and for the rest of you who have probably interacted with Jamaicans quite a bit because of your work through Rotary, you realize that we are a very touchy-feely kind of people. And so, we're talking to you about anything, and it's, the pat on the back or the shoulder or the embrace or something like that. That's just our natural way of doing things. No, in Japan, that is not the natural way of doing things. It is not a very touchy society, whereas in the West, we shake hands when we greet and so on. They bow, and there's this distance and there's this personal space. So imagine me as a teacher going into the Japanese classroom, and I'm walking up and down the classroom, and I stop and look over a student's shoulder, and I put my hand on his or her shoulder, just to say, how is it going? Are you understanding? And that student jumps 5 feet in the air because they're not accustomed to being touched. So these are some of the little things And little and not so little things, the nonverbal communication that Joan alluded to, that are lurking there beneath the surface. And that tells you why it is so important to think through these things as you enter another culture or as you interface with persons from other cultures. It's as you see there on the left-hand side, these are the unconscious rules. We don't even think about them in our own cultures, but it's important to think about them and also to think about them, as I said, as you start to interface with other cultures.
Janet, would you say that even with that, like, yeah, we have different cultures and we have different ways of dealing with it, but as you learn about each other, you find that there are some commonalities, right?
Absolutely.
It is just, as you said, in Jamaica, you're huggy, touchy people. And in India, we're the same way. We're very huggy, touchy people, you know? So there are certain things that bring out the commonness that also brings people to say, you know, you and I are not so different.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you. And that's really what you need to focus on. So it's not, cross-cultural communication and awareness is never about being negative. It is just about sharpening your senses to the differences. But you're very right, Viv. It's also about opening your eyes to the many, many similarities that there are. And we'll see a little bit more of that as we go along in the presentation. So empathy. Empathy, values drive behavior. If I know what you value, then I know how to treat you with respect, and that builds empathy. And that's a very important part of cross-cultural learning, of cross-cultural tolerance and awareness. Just all that we looked at in the slide before were those values that lie beneath the surface. And the more you know about it, the more you can put yourself in the other person's shoes and be empathetic rather than taking the approach of, well, that's wrong. My culture is right and that other culture is wrong. There is no right and wrong with cross-cultural awareness, but rather instead, it's a recognition of how your background and all these values and beliefs and behaviors are influenced by that cultural background. And then it's the understanding and recognition, just as you said a while ago, of the differences and the similarities that lie between cultural groups. And cross-cultural awareness, very importantly, is getting you to that point where you can understand and effectively interact with people from different cultures. So that's the ultimate goal. So we mentioned empathy a while ago. And so to re-emphasize as one of the key elements of cross-cultural awareness, this is giving you the ability to see things from a different perspective. And in so doing, you promote mutual respect and understanding between each other. Cultural sensitivity is another key element. And we see the word respect coming up again. You have respect towards the cultural practices and norms, which are different from your own, because you have now kind of trained yourself. You've trained the software to appreciate or to have a cultural sensitivity. Your communication skills are very key elements of increased cultural awareness, cross-cultural awareness. And understanding that communication styles can vary across cultures. So I think it was Joan who talked about the nonverbal communication. And if you are from a culture that is very verbal, very direct in terms of their communication, you can see where interfacing with another culture, which is nonverbal, can be difficult. But once you have learned to look for those things and to hone your cross-cultural skills, it makes it much easier. The adaptability is key. Being flexible in your behavior and your attitudes, as I said earlier on, is there a wrong and is there a right, or are there just differences? And then out of all of this comes the recognition that we're all interconnected. Coming back to what Viv said, there's so many similarities, and the similarities but differences, and the impact that the cultural diversity has on global issues is undeniable as we operate now in a space where globalization is key. You know, there are almost no borders anymore. So this is a little exercise that I have for you. I'm just going to give you about 10 seconds to just stare at this image. And I don't want you to say it out loud yet. I just want you to tell me, just to think about, sorry, in the next 5 seconds, what are you seeing? So, what did you see first when you looked at that image? Did you see an older woman, or did you see a younger woman? Who wants to go first? Perhaps someone that you never saw either of them. That's okay. But did anybody see either of those?
Yes, I've seen this image quite a bit, so I've been able to recognize both.
Right. Okay.
I too.
Do you remember, Viv, which one you recognized first?
Originally was the older woman.
Okay, that's interesting because originally for me, it was a younger woman, and it took like about 3 different occasions before I finally picked up the older woman. Anybody else?
Yeah, I saw the younger woman first, right? And then
Yes.
I kind of realized that there was another image there.
You're right.
The woman, yeah.
Yeah. So it takes a while. If we go back and look at it, the younger woman for me jumps out first, but you see for Viv it was different. And this is the younger woman here. But then when you look closely, you realize that her whole face almost is the older woman's nose. And then the older woman's chin comes out and extends here. So why do I include this image? It's simply a way of saying that we all see things differently. As I said, some people may not have seen it at all. Some people saw one thing first and then finally saw the second image. Some people only may have seen one image. But we all see things a bit differently. And it's a question of how you process what you see and how you take that and shape that into a more focused tolerance and understanding of different perspectives and different views. So I just wanted to spend some time talking about a little bit about key cultural dimensions and how cultural influences can affect your decision making and business practices. So there are some theories that Hofstede, who I mentioned earlier on, and other social psychologists have come up with. And I won't go into them in much detail because we don't have much more time, but just to mention a few of them: hierarchy and authority. And some cultures are flat, where you can't really tell the difference, even if people have a higher title. There is not much difference in the way they are treated, in the privileges that they have, etc. Whereas other cultures are really big on hierarchy and authority, and they're actually comfortable with that. In other words, people who are lower down on the rung or the pecking order, if you will, are not comfortable if that structure is not in place because they expect it to be there. Jamaica, as most of you would have experienced, is of course very hierarchical. So you still have situations where the name is on the door, you get a bigger office, or you get an office, your parking space is closer to the front door, etc. So those are marks of hierarchical societies or cultures. Individualism versus collectivism just looks at the way how cultures make decisions, how policies are formed, how people behave in the workspace. Is it about me and me getting ahead with my career, etc.? Or is it a case where the group comes first and decisions are made on the basis of what's good for the group rather than what's good for the individual? Time orientation, we see a lot of this. Yes, somebody wants to jump in? Are we good? Time orientation, we see a lot of this. Some cultures are linear or what we might call monochronic versus other cultures which are very flexible as it relates to time, or polychronic. So you might be listening to Janet's presentation, but you're also cooking, you're checking your son's homework, you're checking your email, and you're making a couple of phone calls. So that's polychronic, whereas there are other cultures which are just focused on doing one thing. We're doing the presentation, we're doing the Rotary meeting, and that's what we're focused on. And communication styles that we spoke about earlier on. Some cultures being very direct, while other cultures use, as we say, non-verbal cues. So it means you can't just listen to the words, you have to read behind read between the lines and pick up what are the cues, what is the person really saying. And I'll just quickly, if I can find it, share. Maybe I'll start with just one example, and if we have time, we'll do another one. So I'm going to leave this on the screen and then just read for you a case study.
Janet,
Sure. Yes.
we're down to about 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. So in this case study example, we have a Dutch national who has recently moved to the UK. He really struggles to understand the British. For example, when he prepares a report or a presentation and shows it to his manager for feedback, he's told it's fine. However, after handing in the report or making the presentation, he discovers that the manager is actually not pleased as things are missing from the report. He can't understand why he's being told that something is fine and then only to find out later that it is not fine. This, along with other communication challenges, is really bothering the Dutch national. So what's going on here? And if you look at your screen, you can probably pick up what's going on here. It's a difference in communication styles. The explanation is it's about how different cultures communicate. The Dutch are used to being open, frank, and honest when giving opinions. So if you say something is fine, then it really is fine. However, in the British culture, it's very different. You need to listen to much more than the words that people say. They say one thing, but they mean another. So when they say in Britain, something is fine, it really means it's not fine. It's the exact opposite.
Oh.
So you realize there how you can get into trouble if you haven't really picked up on some of these cultural dimensions. So these are a lot of theories that you, when you really study cross-cultural awareness and communication, you go into it in great depth. Of course, we can't do that today, but let's leave you with a few tips. So building cultural intelligence, that's ultimately what we are aiming for. Self-awareness is a key part of it. Understanding your own cultural background. As I said earlier on, we often don't think about our own culture. And it's not until we are confronted with something that's different from what we are accustomed to, then we start to think about it. But it's great to start practicing and honing, understanding your culture. recognizing that you do have biases and assumptions, and developing a cultural humility that goes along with that recognition. Then you can be very active about what you do, observing, researching, asking questions. So when you interact with someone from a different culture and you don't understand why he or she acted a particular way or why they may have been offended by something you did, it's quite fine to respectfully ask a question and look for feedback. Try to adapt, and very importantly, learn from your mistakes. I like the respect model. You see the acronym there. The recognition of the difference is empathy that we talked about earlier on. Sensitivity. Patience is key in building bridges of understanding. Not just hearing different viewpoints, but actually trying to engage them. You don't have to accept different viewpoints, but at least engage. And be curious about other cultures. And an action plan for really honing your cultural competence. You can do it at the individual level by setting yourself personal learning goals, creating cultural learning opportunities. So there are a number of you in this group from different cultures. So you could, for example, say, let's have a virtual dinner one night where I cook something, I get online, I talk about what this dish is, what this dish means in my culture, you cook something in your kitchen and you do the same. So different learning opportunities, or actually what you're doing now, which is sharing about cross-cultural communication. Participating in virtual cross-cultural teams, which you're also doing very well. And at the organizational level, as you can see, there are things that you can implement to help to hone your cultural competence at the corporate level. So what are some of the key takeaways? It's important to continue learning. Hopefully, you learned something today that you didn't know before. And so you can build this into your everyday routine, trying to understand and learn more about cross-cultural competence every day or periodically. Deliberately build global relationships, which as Rotarians, you are excellent at doing. Creating inclusive environments, that bring diverse cultures into the sphere and together with one another, and considering and fostering the long-term benefits of cultural competence. So with that, it's short and sweet. As I said, we could talk all day about cultural competence, but that was just to give you a little snapshot. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.